Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today our guest is Robert Crais, and he has written a novel called The Forgotten Man, published by Doubleday. Thanks for coming by.
It's great to be here.
This book, if I read things correctly and I can count, which is uncertain, is the eighth book in what we might call the Elvis Cole series, or do we call it a series?
That was pretty close, Jim. It's the 10th book in the
10th?
Elvis Cole series. And
somewhere in your stuff it said 8.
Well, that's because they have a liberal hiring policy at Doubleday, and
that one wrote it and didn't get it right.
Right. It's not your fault, Jim. They didn't quite add it up.
So it is number...
It's number 10.
Number 10.
I'm no longer the new kid on the block now. I'm officially a veteran.
Why do you do that? Why do you continue to write in a series like that?
Because I love it.
Okay.
I couldn't think, I could not imagine any other way I would want to spend my time, or frankly, any other way in which I could spend my time. I'm totally unqualified to do anything else.
One of the things is that, and I actually was going to get to this later, but I'm going to bring it up now. I've never read an Elvis Cole book before, but I found him extremely likable, a guy with meaning, and he was very real. And I really got fascinated by it.
I appreciate that. I worked very hard for that. It's the Elvis Cole novels. I also write standalone books. I've written a couple of standalone novels and always will sort of jump back and forth between the two things. But I'm mostly known for Elvis Cole and his buddy Joe Pike. Elvis, it really is sort of the lens through which I view the world around me, I think. And he's certainly the way in which I examine myself. So I think it always feels fresh to me because the world is constantly changing, and I'm constantly changing. And as long as there's sort of a fresh view of things, I think that I won't have any trouble imagining new stories for Elvis to tell.
Now, there's a book of yours called Hostage.
Correct.
Is that an Elvis?
No, it's a standalone.
It's a standalone.
It's one of my standalones.
And according, again, to the materials, it was released by Miramax on March 11th.
That's right. It's in your theaters. It's starring Bruce Willis. It's adapted from my novel of the same name, Hostage, and it's a pretty good picture.
And how far away does the adaptation go?
They made a few embellishments and changes that I wouldn't have made and wasn't happy with. But having said that, I think in the main, it's still representative of the book. And I in all seriousness, I do think Bruce did a fine job realizing that character, who's an ex-LAPD SWAT negotiator named Jeff Talley. It's a very high energy, claustrophobic, intense noir thriller. And I think
perfect for Willis, I would say.
You know what it really was? I think it's probably his best role in probably the last 6 or 7 pictures. The best compliment I could play him is that in this picture he looks like a cop, and that's what it required. He did a fine job. Not
like some superhero who's way above the cops.
Exactly right.
Which is what he,
which is what he normally played.
Yeah.
He's the guy you call when the asteroid is about to hit the planet. In Hostage, the role doesn't require that. It's about a real guy, a family man who's jammed up into a really tight, tough spot, and he comes across normalizing himself.
Well, I'll go see that. But Doubleday will want us to get back to
Let's do it.
The Forgotten Man. And it's Los Angeles, 3:58 a.m. Elvis Cole receives a phone call. He's been waiting for this phone call, it says, since childhood. Responding to a gunshot, the LAPD has found an injured man in an alleyway. He's told the officer on the scene that he's looking for his son, Elvis Cole. Minutes later, the man is dead. That is precisely how it starts. And it's a very strange story because this man who eventually dies has to be identified, and they have to find the murderer. But at the same time, there's a very important parallel story going here because there's indication that this man dying in the alley was perhaps Elvis's father, whom he's never known.
That's the motivating mystery here. I mean, Elvis Cole is a guy that knows nothing of his past. His father was simply a myth and a lie created by his mother, who had some emotional problems. I think one of the things, the big theme that this book is about, in fact, many of my books are about, are the origin of family, the importance of family, and that's what I wanted to address in The Forgotten Man.
Well, The Forgotten Man is a novel of suspense and intrigue, but it's also subtle and very sensitive in many places, particularly, I think, when it comes to Elvis Cole and his women. We'll look into this when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast. Our guest today, Robert Crais. He's written a book called The Forgotten Man, a book about which the Kirkus Review Service says, in part, a potent mix of sound detection, black humor, cut-and-run action, and half a dozen first-class surprises. Welcome back, Elvis.
It's good to be here. It's good to be anywhere.
I'm kind of waiting for a guitar thing in there. Welcome back, Elvis. You know, the half dozen or so first-class surprises is really a kind of keep reading, compelling aspect to the book. The other thing is that I liked was that some chapters are written from the standpoint of some of the other characters besides Elvis, like the woman detective,
Carol Starkey,
and that incredible character who is eventually, I can't think of his name, the guy who's hooked up in the gas station.
Frederick Conrad, who we might describe as the maniac.
I think that's an excellent description of Frederick.
Well, every great hero needs a great villain, and if Elvis Cole were to have too easy a time of uncovering the various truths of his past, it wouldn't be any fun. So I decided to create a fellow who was very intent on stopping him from uncovering those truths, and that would be my friend Conrad. And from
the standpoint of plot structure, that's a very fascinating way to do it, because you actually have the hunter becoming the hunted.
Sure.
And which really confuses things.
Well, you know, one of the things that I set about trying to do in the book was amp up the tension. You know, this is a very personal story to Elvis Cole.
Yes, it is.
It really is in many facets. It's about how he felt about his home life when he was a child, what the absence of a father did to him as a child, and the role it's played in his development. Okay, those are all internal emotional things. So in a way to energize that part of the story and to really raise the stakes for Elvis, I wanted also to create a story where the tension would continually build, where you never knew when Elvis Cole or Carol Starkey turned a corner, you never knew who or what might be waiting for him there, both emotionally and also physically. There's a constant state of danger in this book.
And there's a constant longing on his part for his childhood, and the passages, the sections where you write about his leaving home and trying to find his father and, you know, getting in with a carny, and then, you know, meeting the guy who's shot out of the cannon and learning that it's all a trick.
Yeah.
And how hurtful that was. Not only is the fellow not his father, but what he's doing is phony.
Well, in the book, what we establish is that all Elvis Cole supposedly knew of his father as a child was what his mother told him. And she told him that his dad was a human cannonball. And that's all she told him. No name, no date, nothing.
Hi, what's my father like?
Exactly right.
Hell of an answer. You know?
Well, his mom had some problems, which of course when he's little he didn't understand that.
No. He took her at her word. Yeah, as a child would.
As a child would, and so he spent a lot of his childhood. Every time he heard of a touring midway or carnival circus with a human cannonball, he ran off and he chased it down to confront that guy to see if the guy was his father.
Lord.
You know, that represents to me the disillusionments of childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And the book very much is about maturation. It's about making peace with our childhoods and growing into adults. Elvis has spent, I think, the bulk of his life trying to find that little boy and reassure that little boy that he could grow into a man without the presence of his father. And that's kind of what this book is about.
One of the other things that the book is about, and I think in a very subtle and wonderful way, is Elvis's relation with women, particularly two women.
Yeah.
Carol Starkey, kind of like in the present, very much in the present, and Lucy Chenier, who's kind of very much in his past, but ... And that's wonderfully and subtly done. I mean, he's kind of hard-boiled, but his relationship with women is not hard-boiled at all.
He wants a family. You know, he is the little boy who never had a family, and it's now he wants one. He's a grown man, and he's in love with this woman named Lucy Chenier, and she has an 8-year-old son. So that's sort of his surrogate family, you know, the wife, the child. But Lucy is scared of Elvis, and is scared of the danger he brings into her life. So Elvis is trying to make adjustments right now, and Carol Starkey comes into play.
Well, The Forgotten Man, we must remember, is a story of action. It takes you from a 30-year-old unsolved murder to a prostitution ring to an insurance scam, and I think to some moments of great subtle writing. So just stay tuned. We'll be back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
I'm Jim Foster. This is Conversations on the Coast. Our guest today, Robert Crais. His book, The Forgotten Man. It's a novel. It's the 10th novel that he's written, starring, if you will, Elvis Cole. And a pretty fair country writer, at least from the sales standpoint. A guy by the name of Dan Brown, who wrote a book you may have heard of called The Da Vinci Code. And he has said this about Robert Crais's book. Robert Crais is a writer of incredible talent. His novels are not only suspenseful and deeply atmospheric, they are very hard to put down. From Dan Brown, who sold, a few books. And in all seriousness, I found it hard to put down. I think the suspense does that, the way the story, holds together and keeps you running.
Because I'm a writer of incredible talent.
There you go. Now, there are also some passages that I found captivating, which are, in some cases, a little off-plot, and in other cases, they're right at the center of it. One of the things that you mentioned in the last segment was that Elvis runs away when he's a boy.
Right.
And there is a man who goes after him, hired by his mother. And the man's name is Ken Wilson. And he's now in Miami, Florida. He's very old. And he's sitting on his porch with a scotch and water. And because it's Florida, the ice cubes are fading away. Wilson sat in the dark on his porch, feeling old and disgusted, as he listened to the frogs squirming along the banks of the Banana River. Moths the size of a child's hand scraped against the screen that was the only thing saving him from the clouds of mosquitoes and gnats that filled the night with a homicidal whine. The Florida, Booster Club was going to get for that. Wilson figured all he had to do was punch one finger through the screen, and so many goddamn monsters would swarm in they could suck him dry before sunrise. He thought about doing it. He thought it would be pretty damn nice to be done with the whole awful mess of his life. Then he gets a phone call, and he answers it the way he did when he was a private investigator. And Wilson answered like always, "Ken Wilson, Mr. Wilson, this is Elvis Cole. You remember?" Of course he remembered. Though it had been a few years since they last spoke, the boy's voice cut clear and bright through the years, riding the backs of memories like a pack of greyhounds exploding after the rabbit. I loved it.
Thank you.
I loved it.
Thank you very much.
And you know, when you first hear about this Wilson guy, you don't really like him because he's, going after the kid and he's being pretty mean, dragging him back. But then you give us this time at the end of his life with the mosquitoes in Florida, and you really like him.
Well, in Elvis Cole's world, a world when he was a child where his mother was very peculiar. She had her problems emotionally. He spent most of his childhood with his grandfather, who didn't want him, and running away, searching for a human cannonball. The one man, the father figure, the guy who cared about him, was this private investigator, Ken Wilson, who his grandfather always hired to find Elvis when Elvis ran away. That really was the daddy figure in Elvis Cole's life. And when you think about it, here's Elvis Cole, grown man, professional private investigator. Who ultimately did he model his life after? It was that man, Ken Wilson, the man who came to find him when he needed to be found.
And I think that passage that I read from gets that across. It's a good job.
Thank you.
There's also a lot of the field of Los Angeles in this book, including the marvelous description of a restaurant called Musso and Frank Grill on Hollywood Boulevard. It was a 5-minute walk from the Hollywood station. It's been in the same location since 1938, hunkered down behind glass-pane doors that have kept the restaurant safe since Hollywood's early beginnings, when movie stars and studio heads filled the back tables. They've served pretty much the same menu since 1938. It's like going in and having a nostalgia menu. Yeah, it's easy to order. And when other restaurants in L.A. went light with nouvelle cuisine, Musso's piled on butter and salt. I want to go there.
You'd love it. And have a martini.
Yeah.
Best in town.
You got to have that. And I'm sure they have wonderful mashed potatoes.
They do.
And there's probably something called steaks there.
Real steaks.
Beef steaks.
Beef steaks with butter on it.
Yeah.
Now, I'll tell you another story that we're in San Francisco. It's relevant to here, the home of Dashiell Hammett.
Yes.
Dashiell Hammett went down to Los Angeles to work in the movies. At Musso and Frank's restaurant is where he met a woman named Lillian Hellman and forever changed his life. That's where they met and fell in love.
I'll say. Okay, the book today has been The Forgotten Man, and I think we got across that it's a multifaceted book. It's got just all kinds of things going for it in terms of relationships, in terms of intrigue and mystery, and shoot 'em up and find 'em. It's a book that, if you get it, you won't forget it. The Forgotten Man. It's a novel by Robert Crais. And this has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.